This discussion, we are going to go over whether experiments in computer science are needed and should we continue with computer science experiments. I am going to argue the side that experiments are needed and that we should continue them. I'm going to prove this through a few different areas. One, I'm going to define what an experiment is, and then I'm going to talk about some of the history of computer science experiments. Then I'm going to discuss some of a couple recent experiments that have helped the human race, and then I'm going to talk about some experiments that are going on now that I see will be needed for the advancement of the human race. And without these, I don't know what would happen to the human race without these experiments that happened. So, um, first, what is an experiment? Well, under the dictionary definition of an experiment, it defines it as a scientific procedure undertaken to make a discovery, test a hypothesis, or demonstrate a known fact. If we take a little bit deeper dive into what an experiment is, um, a scientific definition states that it's modeling, simulation, measurement, validation, prototyping, testing, performance analysis, and or comparisons. So if an experiment does any one of those types of definitions, everything in computer science then would be considered an experiment. Um, we can see this when we code just a simple project for class or for ourselves. We want to come up with a hypothesis. We come up with saying we want our code to do XYZ. So we come up with that hypothesis. We model it by saying this is how we want it set up. We simulate it by coding it. And then we test it, multiple tests to make it sure that it's doing what it's wanting to do. You test the performance of it to make sure it's a valid code. And then we analyze all those tests and the performance and we compare it to what we expected it to happen. So, by definition, by these two definitions, you could again see that everything in computer science is an experiment. But let's think a little bit deeper now. I'm going to talk about a little history of it and then where it's going. So, first, without the very first experiment of computer science, we might not have what we have now, or it might have been delayed. So, in 1930, the first programmable computer was made by Konrad Zuse, and he did it in his parents' living room. Um, the first digital computer took 3 years to complete, from 1943 to 1946. And within both of those, the programmable and the digital computer, it took many times over of testing, failures, testing, failure, to get it complete to where they wanted it. And by the definition of experiment, they tested it, they analyzed it, they compared it, it failed, they redid it and redid it until it was complete. So even with just the older computers and the systems, it took years to get right. So we needed those experiments to start off to get where we are now. I mean, IBM gave birth to the first high programmable language in 1954, which was Fortran, and that took years to complete. And we know by coding, it's never perfect the first time. And so it took a lot of testing and performance. And without that first code, the first language, it might have taken years later for it to happen. And we don't know where we could have been today without the start of someone coming up with the hypothesis of wanting to invent a language and then go through the whole system of testing, performance, analyzing, comparison, those codes. So where are experiments now, and what have they done for us recently? So there's so much to talk about. I'm going to focus just on one area. NASA. NASA is a perfect example of computer science experiments that shows why we need computer science experiments. It has brought about innovation, has pushed the boundaries of space exploration, and just helped out the human race. Without the beginning in the 1950s and 60s, without computer science experiments, we may have not won the space war. Um, if you look at when it was going on, the person who wrote the code for the lunar module was millions of lines of code handwritten, and it took a very long time. It was an experiment. But you don't send up a lunar module without testing it. They came up with a prototype, they tested the performance of it, and they validated it, and then they sent it up and sent those people. They had to do experiments for it. The same thing with the Voyager satellite. That's the furthest man made object in known space. Um, they came up with a hypothesis of wanting to send up a project, and they did a prototype, tested it, and now it's performing to this day. It is using Fortran programming language, the very first coded language the Voyager satellite uses. In fact, they're still looking for people who understand Fortran so they could be the ones that take over the program. Um, because it is a very old program, not many people understand it. But even without these experiments, who knows where our space exploration might be today? Who knows what knowledge we would have of planets and satellites and just the known space and the universe out there without the computer science programs to tell us that. The computer scientists to take on these experiments and to complete those. So those are just just a couple of examples, and I could spend hours and hours, probably days. We could all talk about computer science experiments in the past that have transcended and shot the human race into the future. But where are computer science experiments going now and into the future, and why would we need these? So, for instance, Neuralink, a company owned by Elon Musk, is wanting to embed a chip into the human brain to help with neurological issues. Um, it wants to help with paralysis and Alzheimer's and expand our abilities as a human race to help us out. Uh, you could code, Elon Musk has says you could code those biological problems out of the system before it even happens. Or if it happens, you could fix your eyesight to 20/20 in a heartbeat. Um, but that is an experiment, and it's a computer science experiment. He wants to use C language and other languages within it embedded, C and Python and a couple others, he said. So is this an experiment? Yes. They are testing right now in pigs and monkeys to find out. In the next couple years, Elon Musk says he wants to test humans for this project. I mean, if it's an ethical, if he can get it ethically approved, then he wants to do that. But is this a needed experiment for the human race? I believe so. These are things that will help humanity, and without trendsetters like Elon Musk to push the boundaries for these experiments to happen, who knows where the human race will be in 20 years? Would it be better off? Would it be less? Would we be where we're at? I mean, we're always trying to press forward and be better. So this experiment will help out the human race. Another one for computer science experiments, AI in medical research. Supercomputers were coded, and they tested and found two drugs that significantly reduced the effects of the Ebola virus. Well, it had a hypothesis embedded into the system. They wanted to find drugs to reduce Ebola. And the supercomputer itself went through thousands and thousands of tests to find two drugs that would reduce the effects. Um, the Google DeepMind AI has discovered drugs for breast cancer research. This was all done through experimentation through computer science. Without these computer scientists that coded the AI um, to learn on its own to figure out the drugs, we might not have better drugs for breast cancer. We may have not have reduced the effects of Ebola, and who knows what would happen in 20 years from now if Elon Musk comes up with a product to help us with neurological issues. Um, Another one that I see it that experiments are happening to this day, this moment, we see it almost every day, is autonomous driving. Autonomous driving, I look at it as it's an ongoing experiment. The system itself uses sensors to read the road, but it's using those sensors written by code for to tell the sensors how to work to allow auto driving, and it's an AI system that is learning as it's going. And without this ongoing experiment, um, we might not have the ability in 10 years to have self-driving cars, which I believe that experiment itself could save thousands if not millions of lives, because if we can have self-driving cars we could have less accidents on the road. I mean, it's proven that accidents are caused by human error. If we take the human error out of it, how often do computers fail? Not very often. The computer usually doesn't fail. It's the code that's the failure. Computers hardly often fail in that sense. So as it's learning, it will become a better driver, and this experiment itself will make the human race better. So all three of those instances show through the definition of an experiment that they came up with a hypothesis. They came up with a measurement. They modeled it. They prototyped it. They're testing it. Now they're testing it. Neuralink testing on monkeys and pigs. Autonomous driving, drivers on the road right now, and cars are learning. And then they analyze the data. Um, Another form of experiments within computer science that's a little bit different way of thinking is hacking. Um, is hacking needed? I believe in a way hacking is kind of needed for computer science, whether it's an ethical hacker or an unethical hacker. Sometimes we need it. But hackers, they're computer science experiments, scientists. Um, how so? Well, they come up with a hypothesis that within a line of code, they want to find a loophole within the system. They sit there and they simulate, they model, and they try to test it out. And if they break through, they are showing a performance of their code. Um, does this help out society? Yes, because it helps build platforms better, or better platforms, such as social media, security, and better design with it. Without hacking, codes may not be improved. They might not know the loopholes. They may not have patchwork be sent out. So I believe hacking is a legitimate experiment for computer scientists. Um, and I'm not saying that we should be hacking everything, but I think that hacking is can be shown to be an ethical certain hacking can be an ethical experiment to help out computer science programs today. So I believe that computer experiments have been part of our life for a very long time now, and they have changed our lives for the better. And the experiments going on now are going to change our lives for the future. And we need computer science experiments to keep pushing the human race forward.